Next generation DevOps, maximizing flow in the IT value stream. Today's flow short topic. I'm Joshua Barnes, and I am once again joined by Steve Pereira. Did I get that right, Steve? I always struggle with trying to get.
You got it. You got it. You absolutely got it. Yeah.
And it looks like there might have been a little technical glitch in us going live. It looks like we're now live. The topic for today is just like we've been going through, right? We've been going through a lot of the blog posts and a lot of the assets that are available as part of the Value Stream Management Consortium, the VSMC. And this topic, the next generation DevOps, maximizing flow and IT value streams, was one of the early blog posts that Helen Beal had written. Helen potentially be joining us during the stream.
Hopefully.
And if not, then Steve's got more expertise than I do when it comes to more of the DevOps and the toolchain stuff. I focus a little bit more on process and framework related items, but fear not, we can still kind of go through the content. One of the things that I'll ask is for anybody that is joining us live is I'll go ahead and make a post. Yeah, if you're out there, just share with us where you're at. Steve is in Toronto. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, so we have a little bit of difference. Just like in the color of our attire, Steve, since we were both in black shirts last week, I decided to go with something a little more light, being white.
So next week I've got to go white, I guess.
Exactly.
We'll just play ping pong with clothing.
Yeah. So from a DevOps and a toolchain perspective, and this blog post was written, maybe 2 years ago now. And so as we know, with technology and tool functionality, things change rather rapidly. So
3 years, actually.
Has it been 3 years?
March 2021.
Wow. And I'll post the link to the blog post in just a moment. So, in this blog post, there's some really good information as far as how you can get data and metrics from a DevOps perspective. But then with the robustness of the tools these days and the integration available, how we're able to start seeing data across sort of the flow of value delivery and getting insights into things that either people weren't able to do before or easily before the point in time that we're at, or the point in time we were 3 years ago, which has gotten obviously a bit easier now. So Steve, what are some of the things that you've seen with organizations and the tool functionality and data? And then in our last blog post, you also mentioned something interesting about using AI to start taking a look at some of the data.
Yeah, well, I think that we've come a long way since the early days of DevOps, and DevOps kind of like emerged as this technical bridge that smoothed the handoff between development and operations, but it also kind of alleviated a lot of the manual labor involved in preparing code for production and getting it out into the world. And because a lot of these activities, were increasing in frequency and complexity as we were able to kind of accelerate delivery. And then everything got thrown over the wall and was a big headache for operations to kind of wrangle and deploy. And, what are our operational metrics? How do we know that this is working? I didn't see it get built, so I don't really know if it's working correctly in production. So, DevOps kind of responded to that need by, I think, principally creating these core capabilities of continuous integration and continuous delivery. And I think, continuous deployment being a part of that tool chain, stitching together all these disparate capabilities into something that constituted a flow that enabled the work to get out and check all the boxes that it takes to feel good about what we're deploying and what we're putting into the world. So when I think about the flow in, an IT context and preparing work to be effectively deployed into production, you got to check all those boxes. If you're doing that manually, it's going to be error prone. It's going to be repetitive. It's going to be boring, which means we're going to miss things. We're going to take things for granted. It's going to be difficult to train people, scale it, achieve any kind of consistency across multiple teams. So the pipeline becomes a platform for achieving flow in a sustainable fashion that is at a level of performance that the organization can now take for granted and pay attention to other things, right? If you're constantly doing everything manually, if you have a lot of manual handoffs, that's where your attention stays. And it never gets the chance to elevate into, okay, how do we do this more effectively? How do we do this at a higher level of performance? How do we scale this? How do we start paying attention to things like AI? How do we stitch in advanced capabilities that can now be added to the platform and raise the tide so that the organization is now operating at a higher level of performance? So that all starts with, I think, a platform that can be as simple as a CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about some of the other metrics? Oh, and it looks like here, I'm going to go ahead and add Helen in.
I am so sorry. I do apologize to you and everybody listening for being so tardy and interrupting as well.
Oh, no worries. So Helen Beal, this just for everybody that is on the stream or watching this on replay. So yeah, welcome. Helen is the CEO and chairman of the board for the VSMC, and again, the blog post that this topic is on is one that Helen had written. So Helen, we're just kind of getting going. Steve talked a bit about some of the tool functionality and perfect segue for you to join in and give us some insights as far as when you wrote that blog post 3 years ago to now, and the difference in functionality and again, the robustness of what we can do.
And do I feel the same way that VSM is the next generation of DevOps, I guess? Yes, I absolutely do. And just kind of maybe give a little bit of context to why I feel that way is having been a DevOps coach and consultant for over a decade, and my introduction to value stream management, like many people's, was through value stream mapping. I found some, maybe not barriers to entry, but some ceilings that I was hitting with mapping in terms of repeatability and getting people in a space and being able to revisit the data, that I felt that DevOps was resolving for us, because when we build a software delivery lifecycle pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline, a DevOps toolchain, we effectively digitize the value stream, and that makes the data available to us in a way that it never had been before in the value stream world. And that's why I refer to it as next generation DevOps, because suddenly we're able to see what we're doing in DevOps in a way that we were kind of making a lot of guesswork before. And I think the previous book, One Flow Short, I think you did, was about flying blind, and that's really where we were coming from before the space we're in now. But you asked me about what's changed in the last 3 years, and I think I don't think anything too dramatic has actually happened in the last 3 years. I know it feels like sometimes that AI is like come on leaps and bounds, but I think that's a lot of hype, and it's about the generative AI elements more than some of the data elements that I think are more fundamental to what we're trying to do within the value stream management space. But it's all there to be had. I think it's all about adoption now, and people maybe putting some AI to one side and doing something that's a little bit more achievable and useful today, she says controversially.
I agree with that. I think that's great insight. I think that, generative AI means more noise in the system, more complication and complexity, more work that is potentially unattributed to contributions on what actually generated this work. How do we link it back to strategic objectives? And then on the value realization, end of it, how did this contribute to a customer outcome and a business outcome? And all that has now become more challenging with generative AI turning up the dial on how much work is being produced, it's not connecting the dots yet. It's not helping us do that attribution. It's not yet allowing us greater and more effective visibility across that entire scope of the value stream. So that challenge is now more consequential. It's a greater challenge, and I think there's greater value in addressing it as well.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because we think of AI being a reduction in cognitive load, but I think what we're both alluding to is that in its current state at the moment, what it can actually do is the reverse. It can be increasing that cognitive load.
Yeah, so one of the other things that I did want to sort of bring up for maybe a bit of a quick discussion is, some of the flow metrics, right? So Steve, you'd mentioned, how do we know that we've got something like a desired strategic outcome that we're working towards, and all the things that might need to happen to support that. From a process perspective, a lot of what we work on with customers is called the minimum value increment. It's just a way to identify the smallest increment we can do that's got value associated with it. And the important thing is to not only see how that is going to support something like an initiative that's supporting a strategic objective, but it's when that increment gets pulled into the workflow. Because it could just be a team that is updating a digital product. It could be multiple teams updating multiple digital products and some supporting area work, and some changes to the organizational aspects. And it's that whole package that needs to be tracked and evaluated. So from a tool perspective, or from a tool chain perspective, are there any things like that you guys have worked within organizations that the platforms are able to track really effectively?
So when we're at VSMC, we talk about these two dimensions, don't we? We talk about flow and we talk about value realization, and they're kind of, if you look at the Value Stream Foundation course from the consortium, you'll actually see there's two different tool slides for both of those areas. So your MVI, your minimum value increment, falls more into the value realization element when we're trying to understand the outcome of it in terms of customer experience. Actually, when we look at customer experience type tooling, we're often talking about things like Google Analytics and social sentiment analysis and your e-commerce platforms and things that can tell you about length of customer journey, and something that is quite foreign and far away from what we often talk about in the context of value stream management and VSMPs, which are much more flow oriented. And that's where we look at the products like Task Top Viz from PlanView, and we look at the Broadcom Value Ops products and things like that. I have to, as a VSMC person, I have to be quite neutral, obviously, because we are a community of all of our members, but there are a number of different flow platforms out there. But what people should be looking for is platforms that help them see really their whole portfolio. So you want it to do a number of things, right? You want a team to be able to measure flow. You want a team to be able to receive feedback on their customer experience, which tells them about the value outcome. So they want to be able to track the path of that MVI and the result of that MVI. And then from a leadership perspective, what they really need to be able to see is across all of their teams or all of their value streams, across their organization or their value stream network. And the purpose of that is it's a financial one and it's a risk one. So the value streams will be crossing over each other in the network, and every time they cross over, there's a dependency, and that represents an opportunity for delay or an opportunity for something to go wrong. So it's about dependency mitigation. And then the other piece is about bets and investment. So it's about kind of understanding your financial portfolio within your organization. If you think of product managers as mini CEOs, each product is a mini P&L. So you want to understand what's making money, what's losing money, what you need to invest in to make it survive, or what you should perhaps be running down. Steve, is that similar to your experience?
Oh, 100%. Very well said.
Excellent. So now we're getting pretty close to our normal time. Since these are shorts, we try and keep them short. So one of the things that I'm going to go ahead and post is both the link to the article, and then also the VSMC is kind of bringing May as VSM Awareness Month. And so we've got a nice tag to start looking for posts and articles and live streams like this. It'll be FlowMo May. So super exciting to have an entire month where we're focusing on VSM related content and awareness. Helen, Steve, any other thoughts on this topic or any others before we wrap up for today you'd like to share?
I think the only other thought is I'd like to hear from other practitioners. So one of the great joys of being involved with the VSMC is, as I've said, I've got a DevOps background. I was coaching and consulting in DevOps for over a decade. So everything I tend to see in VSM has that DevOps lens on it. But in the VSMC, we have practitioners coming from, like you, kind of agile at scale environments. We have lean practitioners. We have people from manufacturing coming in. So I'd love to know how people think that VSM fits in their framework and how all these frameworks connect together in their minds, because I think that's undeniable that all these frameworks are connecting and building on each other, and we all have our own experiences in certain different ones. But I'd love to hear more from people about where VSM locks in and whether it's the next generation from them as well, or whether it's something that's lagging behind, maybe even.
Yeah. Steve, any parting thoughts from you?
I think that the one thing that stands out to me about this progression from DevOps into value stream management is kind of the scope that we're actually considering now, right? It's no longer just Dev and Ops. We're looking at everything from, what we say, we characterize as hypothesis to happiness, right? That's the actual inception of work, why we're doing something, and what we think the outcome is going to be, all the way to when we deliver something to customers and they interact with it and respond to it, and what happens, as a result of all that work and all that effort and investment. And that is a much larger and more consequential scope than DevOps. And, the other thing to consider is that this is a yes and. This is not replacing DevOps. It's really augmenting the scope and the depth and the attribution of, what DevOps is actually meant to do, which is increase organizational performance and outcome for customers, right? And that's business customers, stakeholders. It's individual contributors, right? So working inside of a value stream, being able to say, well, I had something to do with this positive outcome because I can trace, my efforts as it pertains to, what we were able to achieve all the way at the end of that flow. So I think that's, really empowering for somebody who's contributing inside of a DevOps context to be able to connect the dots to the big picture and what actually matters to the organization. So it's really, to me, encouraging as a yes and for organizations and for folks who are currently in this scope that's really exciting, but may not actually be moving the needle until you start to think about this in a value stream context.
Yeah, excellent. So our next flow short will be on value stream metrics. We'll get into a little bit more of the metrics discussion next week. Thanks everyone for joining us live, as well as for those of you that are watching on replay. Helen, Steve, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next flow short.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.